everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of Experiment 7's The Laboratory. This is our first try at live streaming. We're really excited to experiment with this platform, just like we do with all of them. I want to sort of introduce the concept of this stream, as well as myself. Then we'll bring in some pretty cool people. So the lab is going to be Experiment 7's regular live stream where we talk about making games, we talk about some of the games that we're making, talk about working in VR, talking about what it's like to work on games, and specifically we want to tailor this to the people that are joining us. So if you guys have any questions, you have anything that you want to hear about, we got eyes on the chat, and we're open to any line of discussion. And that's really what the goal is here. It's to open up a line of communication between us, with our players, with our colleagues, with the games industry and the VR community at large. So we hope you'll join us both in the chat for Twitch, but also on social media. Oh, hey, look at that. I have a first follower. What's pretty cool is this actually works. We weren't sure about that. Yay, early wins. Okay, so let's get started. So first, allow myself to introduce myself. My name is Coray Seifert. I've been a game designer and producer, writer for about 15 years now, and I'll be the host of the laboratory. So I'll bring on people from the Experiment 7 team. Most usually that's going to be our two co-founders who we'll introduce in a sec. But personally, my background, I worked on the Homefront and Frontlines series of games as a game designer and writer. And recently I had the good fortune of working with a couple great folks at Slingo as the VP of product. And I, a couple years ago, worked with the Autodesk AR and VR group in the early Stone Age game development days of VR. So, I've worked at all these cool companies. I've had all these really cool jobs. And no joke, my favorite job ever has been working here at Experiment 7. I'm the director of production, which means I get to work with everyone on the team. And we have a really sensational team collected that we're really excited to work with. So if you ever have any questions about what it's like to run an indie team, or production questions, being a game producer, how to become a game producer, I'm always open to hearing those kinds of questions, whether it be through the chat here on Twitch, talking about it live, or through social media. So I'd like to bring on our first guest, and let's go ahead and bring him in all the way from the West Coast. Ladies and gentlemen, Geoffrey Zatkin, creative director. How you doing, Jeff?
Hey, how you guys doing today? So, yeah, you'll see I'm actually wearing a jacket because it's in San Diego right now. It's cold. It's like 65 degrees. It's brutal.
You forgot the air quotes. We're going to need mandatory air quotes when you guys talk about your weather.
Yeah, this is, of course, one of the big points of contention between the West Coast and the East Coast studios is what we think is cold and what everybody else thinks is cold. Because,
we have an embargo on San Diego talking about weather for the fall and winter months, which you are violating right now, my friend. So this is your first warning.
Yes, but the first rule of Stream Club is it's Stream Club, and we're allowed to be, doing whatever we want on Stream Club, like taunting you guys about your amazing New York weather.
You're just making up. This isn't Calvin Ball. You're just making up the rules. Okay, So Jeff, I think the first thing I'd love to hear, and I hope our audience would be your background, some of the stuff that you've worked on, and how you sort of first got involved with these crazy cats.
Sure. So I've been in the game industry for about 21, 22 years now as a pro. I was an indie before that. In elementary school, I had an Apple IIe. I was learning how to program on that. In junior high, I was doing BBS games. In college, I was programming and playing on MUDs. And a little bit after college, I saw a Usenet news ad looking for people who could program LPC C++, which is an old MUD language, and design 3D levels. And I'd been modding Marathon, which was Bungie's precursor to Halo. And that ended up being Brad McQuaid, who was a producer on EverQuest. And I took my Mac in, because I was a Mac boy at that point, and they were a PC shop, showed him my code, showed him my levels, and they hired me within the week. And I was one of the original designers on EverQuest. And I did EverQuest, EverQuest 2, Sovereign, and a whole bunch of the Sony Online games. Went over to Monolith Productions to work on a DC Comics game. Our sister team was the Matrix Online. We're all cool people, and we were also making Condemned and Fear at the studio. So it was a really good time to be at Monolith Productions. And So I did about a decade of game dev, and then in '06 I started a company called EDAR, which Electronic Entertainment Design and Research, with a good friend of mine, Greg Short, and we went from a two-man little game research shop up to being the largest video game specific research firm in the world. And last year we got bought by NPD, so I did a decade of design, I did a decade of research, and then, you know, after that I'm like, screw it, I want to go make games again. So I was chatting with Demetri about what kind of games I wanted to make, and I thought VR AR was a really cool and neat new spot to hop into. So it was like, hey, let's go do cool stuff there. And that's probably a good place to introduce Demetri.
Yeah. Let's bring him in. Demetri, why don't you come on down? So let's see if we can get lined up here.
This is our high-tech guest entry system. Hello.
Hi, Demetri. How's it going, man?
I hope that hurt quite a bit.
That was my hand. I broke my hand. So, ladies and gentlemen, Demetri Detsaridis, the managing director of Experiment 7. Demetri, why don't you give us a little bit of your background?
Well, I'm Greek. For the record,
Demetri, great background.
That is exactly how you pronounce my name. So thank you very much, Coray, and congratulations to whomever tutoring you on that. Congratulations to me. Like Jeff, I am also old. I've been in the games business for about 16 years, and I started out doing what eventually became known as casual games, but were at the time just games on the web, and then went over to dumb phone mobile games before it made any kind of sense, either creatively or financially, to be involved in mobile games. I actually wound up working on DC Universe Online, and that was where I met. Oh, where should I be pointing? That way. That was where I met Jeff, I worked at DC Comics in New York. Jeff was at Monolith, which was the company that was developing DC Universe Online, when the project eventually expanded and exploded and moved 2-3 different times, I did not wind up moving out to Seattle or to San Diego or to Austin, Texas, where it wound up, but instead stayed here in New York, and I kept working on.
Seattle was cool, though. I mean, you would have been a great Seattleite.
I would have been I was gonna say I would have been a really grumpy Seattle, but that doesn't change anything, does it? So I stayed in New York and left that shop because the job moved to Seattle, and then wound up at Ubisoft / Gameloft, and then a bunch of other places. Eventually working on both dumb phone mobile games again, and then social games, and with Kevin Slavin and Frank Lance over at Area Code, which we then sold to Zynga, and became Zynga New York. And then after that, they folded the studio and all of the other studios on the East Coast. And then I wound up working at a very large company making a game about larceny of automobiles. I don't know. So that was up until then. And then recently, in the last couple of years, as Jeff mentioned, we kind of got together because obviously we stayed friends throughout this whole period. I hope stayed friends throughout this whole period, and then wound up kind of talking to each other. Okay, well, Jeff was closing down his shop, and I was getting excited about VR and AR, and what would we do with VR if you were gonna start a VR games company? What would it be, and what would we make? So that kind of takes us to that.
I know the answer to this one.
Yeah, Geoffrey. Yeah, how about you, young man?
Mm-hmm. So, though actually you could tell the story just as well, but part of the fun of VR is that presence is really strong in VR. And that one of the kind of cool social hacks about, or mental hacks that VR does, is it makes your brain think you're actually somewhere different. And this is, a really different thing than when you're talking about mobile phones, or you're talking about web games, or you're talking about console games, you're talking about PC games. All of those you're playing on a 2D environment that you're looking in to see 3D. VR is really one of the first things where your brain, you look around, you're like, holy crap, I'm in an actual place. And the feeling that it gives you, the presence, is particularly strong. And so as Demetri and I were kind of talking about what kinds of games make good use of presence and what else does presence do, one of the big things about presence is it also makes you feel, besides the environment, that other people are there. And Demetri and I are both big fans of kind of social styles of games that you can play with your friends together. And so we were like, strong use of presence, good rooms, good environments, can make you feel like your friends are there. And so as Demetri and I are talking, he's like, hey.
Oh, wait, I'll say it. You know what's kind of already like that is tabletop games. And another thing that Jeff and I have in common is that we both really hate vomiting. And
I love vomiting, actually, for what it's worth.
Yeah, but
that is high on my list of things to avoid.
So yeah, one of the kind of beneficial side effects, despite the fact that both of us get motion sickness pretty badly, about picking a type of VR to develop that does not involve jumping out of planes, getting on roller coasters,
or shot by zombies,
or getting shot by zombies. That it's both a little bit. It's both a little bit more conducive to the kind of gameplay I find myself most drawn to now. That again, old and not as good at the shooty. And from anyone that already knows me on this Twitch is going to pop up and say you never were any good, which is totally true. But yeah, as a passionate tabletop gamer, like it seemed like something that went together really, really well. Tabletop games are all about talking to people and having a conversation that's not only taking place like over the game, but the game itself is part of that conversation, and you're sort of talking through your actions in the game, and you're. One of the most fun parts of it is how your personality comes through in how you're playing. Whether you're just like agonizingly evil and trying to like make your friends totally hate you, for example, that kind of behavior shows up.
One of the awesome things too. So like these guys are like thinking like vision and what would be great and this and that. As the cold-blooded producer here, you have to appreciate the fact that like what's awesome in VR right now, right? Horror games, flying simulators, things where you shoot stuff, things where zombies eat you, right? There isn't a lot of strategy games. Yeah. There's some really good ones, but it's by no measure a saturated market. So we can see that when we get our games out there, people are not only excited to play them just because they're good, but they're just like finally the stuff that I like to play, right? So that's been pretty cool to see.
And honestly, also coming in from kind of the research side that I was doing, the thing you don't do when you're starting up a new company is hop in and do exactly the same thing as everybody else, because that's really hard. What you want to do is you want to be going into the blue ocean, the area that people aren't in yet, and hopefully going to get there and make cool things. And the fact that we all like board games and games on tables, and there weren't a lot of people doing it, was very strong on appeal. The other one is so I've been playing D&D since before I was 10. I used to play Car Wars and BattleTech and Robotech and all GURPS and Shadowrun and Cyberpunk and Champion. All of these great role-playing games, tabletop games. Axis and Allies and Diplomacy and all of this stuff, which is really cool. But all the guys I used to play with and girls I used to play with, were in junior high, high school, and college. I'm never going to get them all back together in the same room. So kind of part of our thought on this too was, wouldn't it be cool if we could make these awesome rooms, awesome environments that you and all your friends who'd kind of scattered to the winds across the world could virtually come back in, from New York and San Diego and Tokyo and, Paris, and be like, hey, you know what? Today we're going to hop in, we're going to synchronize our watches across the world for time. we're going to all hop in and virtually come back together and, hang out again and play games together. So that's part of our company's kind of founding mantra and thought is, hey, let's get the band back together. Let's get everybody back in, hang out, chat, and play games. Because, games are supposed to be played together in that kind of way. So this is a lot of us looking at how do we do that and do that well.
Yep.
So I'd just like to point out, Jeff, that Team Geo points out, nice jacket. I also told you to wear the jacket. Just gonna,
Okay.
myself in the back there. And then I think there was another one that I thought was just fantastic. Pixel Monster 1. Demetri has the Mr. Rogers vibe going on with that classy sweater. Not to bring it down to that level, but pretty sharply dressed team, right?
It's a beautiful day in our neighborhood. Thank you, Pixel Monster.
Nice. So actually, I had a great question. Actually, this one's also from Pixel Monster. This is the first time you guys have had the opportunity to build your game from scratch.
You take that first. I'll follow up,
and then you can continue. So that's an awesome question, and it's one of those things that you're sort of torn as a game developer. Like, oh, I totally think I want to build a game from scratch versus, oh, I really wish that I had a property that I was leaning on here, or, oh, I really wish I had some kind of code base. Anything at all to start from. My first few years in the games business were doing casual games, and we kind of had to start from scratch just about every time. Although in a lot of those instances, we had, if we were doing a Teen Titans game, we had the property. If we were doing, that awesome Harvey Birdman game, you had that cool property to lean on, and so the very first game that I designed way back in the day was the Adult Swim game with Brack and Zorak and those guys. So it's strange because you almost sort of never start completely from scratch in the games business, right? Like everything that you're doing is building on the shoulders of 20 odd years of history. So unless you're making, I was just going to give an example, and then that example wound up being wrong too. I was like, oh yeah, well, Dota is like a totally original thing, but of course it's a mod, right? So unless you're making Space War, you're never starting completely from scratch. But that said, it is totally fun not to be making a sequel right now.
Yeah. And it's funny, I'd give a lot of talks at like GDC and other areas, and one of the things people ask me all the time, they're like, man, you've been a game designer for over 20 years, how
do you keep your hair so shiny?
It's that top light coming down. And they talk about these great ideas for games, and one of the things, especially, I think I completely demoralized a class at Digipin once. They were like, how do you really bring your own game ideas to fruition? And I said, what's a sad thing? In 20 years of game development, never once has anybody come up to me and said, hey, do you have an idea for a game we should make? It's always, if you're working with a team of any decent size and the funding's coming in, it's not what game would you like to make? It's, hey, we've secured the rights to do this. Or, hey, we'd like you to move on to be lead designer on this game. Like when I got hired into Monolith Productions, they already had the game they wanted me to do when they were hiring me in. All of these different ones. It's an absurd rarity to actually have the luxury of being a design team and somebody saying, what kind of game would you like to do? Unless you're an indie on like a 2 or 3 person team. But it's just, it so rarely happens in the industry.
Yeah, one of the crazy things about doing that when you're an indie, because I've been on that side of as we both have, but is that even when you get your pick of the litter when it comes to genre or expression or something, there you're by and large limited by business practicalities. You're limited by technical practicalities. So it's like, all right, I'm gonna do the best spy shooter with stealth elements on Earth that I can make in Game Maker. So one way or another, you always have to you always have to work within the constraints. But as you know, even as a suit now, or as a designer years ago, or as a producer,
You mean a sweater now?
I'm a sweater, yeah, but I'm a sweater kind of a suit.
Sweater.
You still the constraints are the thing that makes the experience of designing and of development like click, right? Because if someone just said, "Hey, blank sheet of paper, video game," odds are that you might make up a sprawling mess.
It would probably suck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But regardless, getting to pick kind of the board games that we're going after and table games. And I always say games on tables because even though we're doing board games now, our company's plan is if it's played on a table, those are the kinds of games that we want to be doing. And that can extend out to a lot of things beyond even what we're currently working on. But the nice thing is everything we've worked on so far have been really cool properties. And that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, one of the we did an AMA when Dungeon Chess came out, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we did an AMA when Dungeon Chess came out, and one of the people who was just like in there chiming in, and I double checked, it wasn't one of our friends, answered a question that I thought was terrific, right? So Dungeon Chess is like a battle chess style game that has monsters from the D&D universe. And
right. So it's an official D&D thing. It isn't we're like sliding that in. It's we went over, pitched the WotC guys. It's like we want to do D&D, on an animated like Harry Potter wizard chess, dungeon chess, battle chessy kind of thing, and they're like, "Hey, that sounds pretty awesome."
So one of the first questions we got in the AMA was like, well, why did you make a chess game instead of this awesome, huge D&D game that's got, castles and everything? And we were like, because of how business works, you can't necessarily just say, well, I'm going to pre-announce everything we're going to do for the next 7 years. But somebody popped up in the comments and said, well, I'm not on the team, but if I had to guess, I would say that you kind of start with stuff like this, right? They started with a 2-player game, and then the next thing they do is probably going to be a 4-player game, and they probably started with this license to kind of like get used to doing everything, and then have other aspirations to do more and bigger things over there. And I was like, thank you. Whole Foods shopper 7594301.
I think that was actually
but yeah, so to your earlier topic that you flung out there, like, yeah, obviously we want to do increasingly complex and exciting things, but there also have to be there has to be a big audience out there for it, because if you went out and got an enormous license like Dungeons and Dragons and wanted to do an RPG game in it, you don't want to do that for an audience of hundreds. It's neither economical nor satisfying from a creative perspective.
And what Demetri means by that is, we're currently in the very first generation of VR. This is Gen 1 consumer grade VR. And one of the things as a company that you have to do is you have to figure out what the market size is. How many people could buy your game, and that helps determine your budget. So, if 100 people had bought VR headsets, the most copies of your game you could ever sell would be 100. And you'd never sell all 100, you'd sell a percent. If you're lucky, you might get, 20 or 30% of your audience, potential audience buying your game if it's a small market. If it's a big market, you're lucky to get 3 or 4 or 5% of those people buying it. So, when you look at the amount of VR headsets out there right now, we're like, cool. This is about the budget where we hope we can, not lose too much money making the game. And then as it grows larger and larger and larger and larger, you can start doing bigger and bigger games with hopefully your company not running out of money and going out of business. Because we like not going out of business.
Yeah, exactly. That's long been our number one goal. And we will want to keep it that way as well.
So going back to Pixel's original question, I think one of the reasons why this is my favorite job is I remember when we kind of all like got the first build together, and like the lead engineer on it sort of sent it over and was like, okay, got a room, it's got a square, and the square is where the table's gonna go. And So over my career, I've worked on a couple of games where it was sort of like, okay, let's come up with an idea and make something and see if there's a market for it. And each time it's been really unsuccessful. Usually it only makes it to like an email or something, or like maybe a meeting, and then it just flames out, because that's how these projects work. And for me, this is the first one that's not only gotten to launch in a interesting way, but has had hey guys, here's a box, all the way to we're working on our third game now with some of the biggest licenses in the world. So I think that's pretty exciting. There's also another great question over here from someone with a glowing username. Let's see if I open one. Alchemist Prime. Oh, that's a clever one.
Yeah.
Is there going to be avatars, like being able to actually look like a character from D&D or whatever have you?
That's a cool idea, and yes, there are. In Dungeon Chess, which to answer a later question is indeed possible to buy on a Samsung Gear. There are a couple of D&D style avatars. A gnarly looking dwarf, a badass wizard with a super huge hat. One of the reasons why I guess we can talk about this like kind of ad hoc, but one of the reasons why the avatars work the way they work in our system right now, the avatars you'll notice are if you played any of our games, are designed kind of to look like masks. So there are a ton of different masks in there. There's like a little cat mask. And
a big thing to note too, real quick, is they're masks, but they map onto the user's body movement. So, when you see them, you get like kind of the full movement of the body moving, but with kind of the cool mask.
So the one of the reasons why we did that is because if you were to put a fully articulated 3D model of a dwarf in there and had the eyes looking everywhere and everything, oh my holy god, is that creepy? You will. Unfortunately, for now, you'll have to this is good news. You'll have to take my word for it, because nobody's doing it, because it's insanely creepy. So at some point, somewhere along the line, someone's just going to be like, to heck with creepy. I'm going to let you do it anyway. And then you can use, you can see exactly what that looks like. But that's one of the reasons why people have picked different solutions, whether that's masks or in the Oculus case, the ghosts with the That's fun. I'm going to just do. There are a bunch of different solutions. In the meantime, while the hardware gets better enough that it can detect your lips moving, and while VR becomes less and less of a total processor hog, so that rendering avatars isn't like the only thing your game is doing. So you'll notice that some of the games some of the apps that essentially are just avatars talking around, in there, that's where the avatars are like super high resolution. Because there's nothing else going on.
That's taking all the processing power at that point. But as art direction was going, my number one thing to our art director was models cannot be creepy. Creep factor 0. And so we designed very much around that, because again, friendly places. You don't want to be creeping. Well, you may want to be creeping out your opponent across the room from you, but if we're trying to gather things and make it kind of fun meeting up, creep factor is very low on our list of desired things.
Yeah, I think one of the things we were really good at was getting sort of masks for a variety of people. You've got like the purple butterfly mask for one kind of user, and then you've got the Viking helmets. Yeah, or the awesome D&D masks. And what's cool is that they're sort of like, some of them do feel very aggressive, and they like sort of toe the line between aggressive and scary, but they always feel not creepy, right? They feel good to look at them.
And that's one of the reasons why.
Fox is still my favorite.
Which one do you like? Oh, the Kitsune mask.
Yeah, I like my fox mask.
Yeah, there's a reason why it ends up in all of our trailers.
Yeah, and this may not be the very last thing that we ever do in Avatar world, but it seemed to us to be a really good way to kind of get started on, okay, it can't be creepy, it has to be expressive, it has to allow people to say something about themselves. I mean, you can hear everybody talking, so at the end of the day, it's you can tell who's in there.
I remember. Do you remember the first day we turned it on? Like it was sort of like it took a while to like sort of build all the infrastructure components, and we had to build the art. And then one day, the masks went in. Yeah. And it was all of it. It was just magic. It just worked so well. Like you're just sort of like talking. You hear someone like, and like just the gesture of being like doing this. Yeah. You're like, wow, I get you. I feel that, right? Like. It was incredible. I can't remember a time in 15 years I've ever seen a feature come together on the first try like that. It was just awesome.
I think that some of that was thanks to some of that was thanks to the fact that we actually have people who work here who have been doing VR for longer than just the length of this company. We're really lucky in that respect. To have some folks who have been doing VR for a few years, and then other parts of that is thanks to the SDK from Oculus, which is actually easy enough that it didn't blow up the first time that you used it. So we started on the Rift and gear, just pretty much because we had already known a couple of people that went to work at Oculus. It wasn't
we started on the DK too.
Oh yeah. But I mean, as far as platforms, it's not like we think like, oh, the Vive sucks. It's much more random than that.
I don't know if you actually just saw the question that popped up, but that was prescient. So Team Geo asks, when will it be ported to Vive? I know 8 people with Vives and 1 with a Rift. That's an excellent question. We get that one a lot.
Yes. Well, the hacky good news is you can kind of already run it there, because if you use Revive Team Geo, it works just fine.
Actually, our engineer who is a big Vive person, he swears it looks better on Revive.
Yeah, which is weird because it shouldn't. But okay, yeah, no, I mean we've had it running on Vives and it worked. Yeah, it is. And we do get asked this question a lot, like, hey, why is this coming out on Rift and not on Vive? But we will get there. I swear. It's just a bandwidth constriction thing. We don't have enough employees to write video games as fast as we want to.
But we do have plans in the future where we have a guy porting over to PlayStation VR right now. So, we will be getting this to as many places as we can, and the same with Catan. Catan will, be coming out on the Rift and the Gear and PlayStation, and then hopefully over to HTC
Why don't we talk a little bit more about high-level strategy, right? Because this is a sort of central question of what we do, right? Like, are we a Rift company, or what's our approach there?
We are a VR company, and we are a VR company that had a bunch of Rifts. Thank you to the guys at Oculus for making that a reality. But I think we don't try to restrict. For example, we try to make sure when we developed interface stuff that the interfaces that we've developed, and Jeff, you can talk to this a little bit more, have been as agnostic as possible, right? Like the interfaces aren't sure whether they believe in interfaces or not. No, they're not tied to any specific piece of hardware.
Yeah, that's funny. It took me a second. Sorry, go on. Saying.
Yeah, Jeff, I know that this is a passion thing for you to make sure that not only can you play on something that has touch controllers, but also if you either don't have or don't feel like using the touch controller, or if you're on mobile.
Yeah. So in a lot of cases too, just as a general philosophical thing for our studio, we're very much on the how inclusive can we make it, and how good of an experience can we make it. So, in a lot of cases, we have, gaze and button select. And one of the great things about that is that hits a whole bunch of levels of accessibility as well. There's, for people who are movement impaired, for people who, in some cases, who are digit impaired or, limb impaired, there's a lot of stuff you can still do with, basically looking and single button clicking. So, we go everywhere from gaze and select up to, gaze and click, or, using the remote or using the Xbox controller up to like full, touch style interfaces. And all of these, it takes a little bit of extra time to do, but we're very passionate about making sure that our games are very playable games for anybody that wants to be able to play them. And the pro and the con to that is it takes a little bit of extra development work, and it means that every platform we transition over to, in addition to going through and saying, oh, hey, we're on HTC, now we need to hook up to their matchmaking, now we need to hook up to their voice, now we need to hook up to the back end that makes our avatars work, now we need to make sure that the messages pass back and forth, and now we need to hook up each of our control scheme paradigms to the paradigm on that platform. Oh, and then wait, we have to maintain all of that. Every time, Oculus does an update, we have to go check, does our stuff do? Every time PlayStation does our stuff still work? Every time HTC does. And so as a small company, part of what you look at is making sure that you can do these in a sustainable way so that, a patch doesn't come out in, Unity, a patch doesn't come out on the platform, and suddenly everybody's like, hey,
it doesn't work on the yeah. Like when you pick a random it doesn't work on the Kobe ping.
Well, so actually, and speaking more to what Jeff is talking about, it's not only a design thing, but it's also an architecture thing, right? We build a lot of our systems to be to either exist on the back end or to exist on a layer that can be plugged into any VR platform. So it's like Jeff was saying, it's one of those things where it takes a little bit more investment up front. But as a long-term strategy, it's great because when a new awesome VR platform comes along, and we can integrate to it, a lot easier than if we had to build everything custom for every platform.
Yeah, and no offense to our friends at Kobe.
Is that real?
No.
Okay.
So speaking of building things, we should probably talk a little bit about what we built and what we're building.
I was just going to say that. So why don't we do a little quick history, right? So you guys started the company, started building the team up. Why don't you give us a sort of overview of what went down with the early days of Magic Table Chess and those?
Sure. So, earliest people were 3 people on this, and Mario, who's our basically runs all of our technology, and he really definitely gave us a leg up because he came actually out of the same lab that spawned the Oculus. And, so he has some pretty deep knowledge on it, which is great. And in a lot of cases, too, he was already talking about, well, these things will work, these things don't. So we're coming in off that. And as we're kind of deciding, okay, board games, looking at some kind of like, okay, actually, Demetri, I like your story about why chess is a good test thing. And then I'll talk about where we kind of went from there.
Sure, yeah. So one of the reasons why we were developing chess was obviously we didn't. No one thought like, okay, the be all end all of VR games is chess. But we wanted to start there for a few different reasons. One reason, and I think that what became the most important reason for us, is that chess is kind of a built-in control group, right? If we develop a VR chess game and people don't like it, it's because of something that we did while we were making, the game. Is the interface bad? Are the controls difficult? Have we, pitched the cameras at the wrong height? That kind of thing. So it sort of became a one game A/B test, because chess itself is always going to appeal to as long as you've got a reasonable chess AI, and there are arguments to be made for improving our chess AI, I realize that. But as long as you have some kind of a reasonable chess AI in there, that if people are saying, hey, this game isn't very good, it's not because of the game of chess. That's pretty well designed. So that gave us a great place to start from and say, like, okay, does our avatar system work? Does our, is the table height right? Even like really minuscule things like that. We've gotten, having started doing chess, we've gotten a big head start on, well, what you'll see with Catan is that a lot of the stuff that people, brought up while playing chess has kind of made its way into Catan. Like, it's not unfair to say that enough people talked about, hey, we need to make the interface so that you can minimize and maximize it. And that's something that that we would not have known had we not developed a first.
It's obvious now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I mean, and even things like that, people don't even think of interfaces much nowadays, but when you're moving into a full 3D environment, there is no screen to like hang the interface on the edges of. And interface, if it's too close, it actually feels claustrophobic. You design these awesome rooms, and if you put things really close, you're like, that feels bad. Mm-hmm. If you put them too far away, they're actually hard to read. So you have to end up making it bigger, which then blocks more of the room. So you end up with this sweet spot, kind of in basically a 1 to 2 meter range of where you want your interface to be kind of floating and interactable with. So you end up designing an entire control paradigm scheme around interacting with things that are literally just out of arm reach, but close enough that you could theoretically lean across and do them. This, of course, then actually is the same space that you want the other players to inhabit. If you're playing with people around a table, they're going to be sitting in that 1 to 2 meter range around you. So as you're putting this together with the game in the middle, you'd be like, okay, I got the game, I got my players, I got hanging interfacey kind of stuff to interact with. Oh, wait, do I move it closer? Some of the close stuff like tablet control is kind of cool, but that doesn't work for all games. So a lot of this is exploration of new medium. How do you get in there? How do you figure out what works well for the style of game you're doing? And because as a studio, we've said all of the kinds of games we're going to do for the foreseeable future are games where you play on tables. We're able to learn off of each game we do to hopefully make every game after that learn or be able to take lessons we've learned from the previous games. So we want to just put together a whole catalog of awesome games that you can play with your friends, in pretty rooms sitting around tables.
Yeah, one of the really fun
starting point for that.
Yeah, exactly. One of the really fun things that about being in this business right now is being part of that early experimental stage, right? Having the folks who are VR fans kind of got to participate in this, right? When the first bunch of VR games first came out on Steam VR and then on Rift, like you would see like 20 different ideas for what does a menu look like. Mm-hmm. And over time, those have sort of crystallized a little bit because, people realize like, yeah, if I'm selecting, my birthday from a menu, like I don't want to have to climb a ladder. But that was literally an idea of like, how do you make a scrolling menu work? Is like as if you were pulling the big wheel from The Price is Right. It's the 11.
That's like the meme with all the terrible UI design. It's like you have to like, all right, which volume do you want?
Yeah, exactly. And so we got to iterate through some of that stuff, and it feels like, I don't know, if this is your thing, it feels pretty cool, right? Like you're in that lead boat, kind of peering up over the horizon, and somewhere out there, there's land.
Yeah, well, I think my favorite story that came out of early Magic Table Chess was, we're talking to the guys at Oculus, like, hey, can we do something here? We're working on this little prototype. We showed them our little prototype, and they were like, that's great. When can you ship it? We're like, no, this is just like a model.
Exactly.
We're working on a different game. This is just chess. And they're like, give it to us now.
Yeah.
And that turned into our first game.
Yeah, and that was kind of a key realization too, was that people, we're working on Catan now, and we did dungeon chess, and like we were thinking that people were basically not hungry for the kinds of experiences that were somewhere between nothing and those bigger games. But as it turned out, like when you have control of the platform, you can tell what people are looking for because you can see what they're typing in to the search menus and so forth. And our friends at Oculus were like, oh yeah, no. Chess game will be that's a great place to start. Why don't you release that post haste?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the cool things, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead, Jeff, but we're at 3:45 already. Time flies when you're live streaming. Is that how they say?
Nope.
So the last thing I wanted to bring up about Magic Table Chess, which is illustrating your point, is that people are really excited about it. We're at over 4 stars on what started as a prototype. So it's just been a really fantastic experience for the company. But I'd like to kind of move things along to the next topic. So just a little bit about dungeon chess. So we're going to go into that a little bit more on Thursday. We have watching me on the WotC stream, which is great. We might have a little special guest joining us from WotC. So we can go into detail there. But from the Experiment 7 standpoint, from the history standpoint, you guys want to give a quick overview of Dungeon Chess and how that came together?
Sure. So actually, Coray, you get a little bit of credit for this one because Demetri and I were sitting there thinking about kinds of things and, what's the game we're going to be doing after this? And Corey's like, hey, I heard John over at WotC's, they're kind of looking for cool things to do with their license. And we're like, well, let's talk to them. Maybe we can do some sort of mashup. And so, we chatted for a little bit and they expressed some vague interest, like, put together a pitch, GDC's coming up, we'll sneak you in for a little bit of that. It doesn't have to be too formal. And Demetri and I were literally like, I guess I probably shouldn't swear on the stream, but we're like, screw it. We're like, fuck that. We're going to make an awesome pitch. So, they're expecting us to walk in, kind of give them this pitch. And Demetri and I are like bringing in one of our concept artists who used to do like WotC art and art for, some stuff they've already done. And we put together this kind of whole presentation and we walk in. I like to say we crashed a GDC meeting. We actually had a spot, but I like to say we crashed the meeting. There are a whole bunch of WotC people in there, and they've been listening to all these pitches of people who, pitching for the D&D license. And we walk in and we're like, what about a little more than we were expecting? And
that was awesomely timed Skype airing. Jeff, can you take that again from
what
they
about
were like, because it crashed on our site for a sec.
Where did I lose it?
Sorry, it just came up under replay. It's like super funny. You'll have to see it.
It was good. It was literally like, they were like, and you just sort of froze like this for a sec. But yeah, no, it was.
Sorry, what were they like?
I don't even remember now because now I'm thinking about you guys laughing and I'm laughing.
It was awesome. You guys, I was in the meeting and they came in expecting Magic Missile and we cast like a level 12 fireball. It was just like everybody's eyebrows were burnt off. Like it was a great pitch.
I still feel like we could have done a better pitch, but
we always feel like we could have done a better pitch.
Yeah, I'm one of the things about about being the business guy. You can tell because I've got a tie on. Is you always feel like you could have done a better pitch and because you don't want to let these guys down, right? Like the guys that are going to be sweating blood for the next however many months or years working on the game. It's trying to encapsulate how talented everybody is or how passionate we are about the project. Wasn't hard to convince the folks at Dungeons and Dragons that we were passionate about Dungeons and Dragons because I mean, you probably look, if you're even watching this right now, you've almost certainly seen us on one of their streams or seen pictures of us playing D&D we're total brand lovers.
Speaking of that, we should, for the next stream, Coray, make a note. We should bring the pitch photos that we put in our deck for that.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Good idea.
Because I think they're sufficiently geeky.
But yeah, so when we eventually did, when we sort of started talking to them seriously about doing the gig, one of the things that we found is that as game developers of a certain age, there were a lot of folks who remembered Battle Chess pretty well, and Battle versus Chess, and Chess versus Mate, and Archon, and some of the many other.
Plus the pop culture stuff. There's Star Wars. There's Harry Potter chess. The Wizarding chess. There's all sorts of chess come to life, both in movies and books and video games. So.
And as a way for us to kind of experience the as a way to kind of like get our feet wet in the universe of making D&D things in VR, it was something that appealed to the crew over there, and which was great. We could have. There were a bunch of things that we have talked about and that we want to do eventually, but this was a great way to kind of get in there and just get a feel for the characters and how they can interact in VR, and I think you see a lot of that love on the screen, and hear a lot of that love on the screen. the stuff like watching the beholder vaporize people and that little rubble sound effect that he makes. Thank you, Leon. We arguably went too deep, but there's no such thing when you're doing D&D, right? Like you feel like you have to do the property justice, and that's kind of one of the great things about working with the folks there, that they are all just as giant nerds about this stuff as we are.
And actually, a shout out to Kate, the art director at WotC, is really sharp, and it was just getting to like actually work with the WotC art director. We're like, here's our concept for this, and have her look at it and be like, yeah, that looks pretty awesome. Being able to go back to the team and be like, yeah, we nailed it.
So let's put a pin in that one. It'll be the first of many producerisms that grace this stream for Thursday, and that's the exact kind of stuff we're going to talk about Thursday.
Okay.
But closing that chapter for now, I think my favorite quote that came out of that, I think it was you were having like a follow-up meeting after that initial GDC meeting with someone who had unsuccessfully tried to get the D&D license. And he just goes, I remember coming out of that meeting and I had heard about you guys and I had heard about the thing that you were doing, and I wanted to meet the team that walked into WotC with 3 guys and came out with the D&D license.
Well, to be fair, if you were doing VR in 2015 and you had more than 3 guys, I wish that I had been talking to your investors.
So we're working on one more game.
Oh, actually, wait. As a quick note, just so people don't, get the wrong idea, putting on my education hat for a moment, big brands like D&D, you don't pick up the entire license. What you pick up is the ability to do D&D brand with something. So like in our case, we picked up the ability to do D&D with chess. That was the thing. So
in VR.
Don't think that we squandered picking up the D&D license, to go do everything, and we decided to do chess.
Right. That's a good point.
Walked in and said, hey, we want to do a D&D mashup with an animated battle chessy kind of thing. And they were like, that sounds awesome.
Right, and so that's why if there was another company out there that wanted to make a D&D pinball game on mobile, that's not like totally all used up by our right. So that's why you can see other great D&D games out there like the BCom folks and the folks at Play
Idle Champions.
Yeah, and Idle Champions. So there's sort of like a little ecosystem, and this is one of the things that's been great about working with Wizards and even some of the other stuff that we're doing, right? Is that like because the games that we're working on by and large have been released into the market for a while and they have their own fan bases, is that you're not alone when you're doing this. There are people who are guardians of the brand. There are people who do stuff like set up interviews for you on live streams, and there are passionate fans out there already. And you owe it to them not to screw it up, but they give you the slack of like, hey, let's see what these guys are doing with it. Like I might not ordinarily play a chess game, or I might not ordinarily play a VR game, but I love this brand and I want to see what's in there.
So speaking of passionate fans, we have another game that we're working on, and we have 4 minutes left. Settlers of Catan. It's a game that you've played.
What game? I've never heard of that one.
It's a game that existed only before the year 2015. But of course, we're making a game called Catan VR. Why don't you guys talk just a little bit about that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it in future streams.
Yeah, so I'll start since Jeff is drinking. So Catan is one of those games that if you are a board game fan and if you have been playing board games for more than the last couple of years, was probably a gateway drug for you at one point or another, and I know it was for us. We got 3.5 minutes. So. Oh
no, that was the drug reference, not the time reference.
I see. No, that's up here, man. You gotta, and then
wrap it
like this.
I guess I feel my drug knowledge.
Yeah. So
like how we
Catan
can
is
see the
basically
replay.
heroin. How do they like that? Is that good with the brand folks? Yep. Awesome. No, sorry. Catan is the kind of game that that people like get hugely into, right? Like you're not like, oh yeah, I played this game once and that was okay. People like rearrange their lives around it, and so having folks with that level of passion and the family right, like the Teubers, the Klaus who created it to begin with, and then his sons Benny and Guido, like those guys are epic. They eat and sleep and breathe this game, and being able to talk to them about, well, what does Catan mean in VR? That's huge.
So wait, are you telling me that's why Benny's a little sheepish?
Oh God, I thought we were gonna get out of this with no puns. All right, that's about all the time we have for today. No, seriously, we are out of time. But
okay.
This is probably how we're gonna end up ending most of these, with Jeff making a really heavy pun. So Demetri, Jeff,
Sir?
Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun. We'll be back. Actually, usually we'll be doing every Thursday. This Thursday, obviously Thursday, as you keen folks probably noticed it. So we'll be back Thursday with some fine folks from WotC talking a lot about dungeon chess.
That stands for Wizards of the
Oh,
Coast.
right. Yeah, people might not know that. And we'll be back every Thursday after that. Keep an eye on social media. And we will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for the great questions.
Before we end, quick note. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Happy Halloween, folks. Happy Halloween, Pixel Monster 1 and Alchemy Prime or Alchemist
Team
Prime.
Geo and
Yes,
Otter Blue
exactly.
and everybody else in the stream.
In TV land.
It's
all
all
right.
the same land. All right.
Thanks,
That's
everybody.
it for today. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.